Section 62, Port of Montreal, Rue Notre Dame East, Quebec, Canada. Deep winter, February 1994, 20 minutes past 4 in the morning. Nobody, not the longshoreman breaking the seal on the overnight freight, not the customs officers asleep in a trailer 3 buildings east, not the intelligence unit that had been quietly photographing this exact stretch of concrete for 6 straight years, and certainly not the 2 men waiting in a van with the engine running and the headlights off, had the slightest idea that the crate coming off that ship would eventually be measured not in kilos, but in bodies. 160 of them. For most of the previous decade, the arrangement along this waterfront had been almost boringly stable. Something arrived from the south. Somebody moved it inland. Everybody got paid. There were rules, and the rules were unwritten. And unwritten rules are the only kind that criminals actually keep. Every man in the chain knew exactly which link he was, and more importantly, he knew which link he was not. Then somebody decided he wanted to be a different link. That is the whole story. That is every story you are about to hear. Strip away the leather, the chrome, the flags, the nicknames, the mythology, and what you are left with is one repeated mistake made in 10 different countries across 30 different years by men who could not tell the difference between owning a street and owning a supply chain. Because here is the thing that outlaw motorcycle clubs have always understood better than almost anyone alive. Territory is money. Control the bar, the dock, the strip club, the trucking yard, the tattoo shop, the little corner where the deal actually happens. And you get a cut of everything that passes through it. It is a landlord's business model wearing a leather vest. It works. It has worked for 60 years on 4 continents. And here's the thing they have repeatedly failed to understand. The man who owns the corner does not own the product. He never has. He rents access to it. Somewhere south of all of it, in the Sierra Madre, in the Valle del Cauca, in a lab tucked behind a village in Sinaloa, in a warehouse outside Culiacan, there are organizations that do not care who owns the corner in Montreal or Melbourne or Mallorca. They care about volume. They care about routes. They care about the arithmetic of 1,000 kilometers and a border and a price that multiplies 4 times when it crosses. And when the man renting the corner decides he would like to renegotiate the terms, those organizations do not send a lawyer. They send a lesson. 10 times. 10 separate occasions when men wearing a death's head decided they had leverage they did not actually possess, and found out, sometimes over years, sometimes over a single afternoon, exactly how far down the food chain they really sat. Stay with me, because number 4 ends with a raid that nobody saw coming. Number 6 involves a phone that the entire criminal underworld begged to buy and should never have touched. And number 10 is not a battle at all. Number 10 is an absence, a silence, a map with a hole in it. And once you understand why that hole exists, you will understand everything else in this video. But before we do, one small thing. A few years ago, a Canadian journalist tracked down a retired organized crime investigator who had worked the Montreal docks through the worst of the 1990s. 31 years on the job, 2 commendations, a file drawer of photographs of men who are no longer alive. The journalist asked him the obvious question, who won? The old detective apparently laughed, not bitterly, just tired. He said something like this, "You are asking the wrong question. Everybody asks who won. Nobody ever asks who was actually playing." The journalist did not understand and said so. So the detective explained it the way you would explain it to a child. There were maybe 400 men involved in that war. He said, 400 men, 8 years, 160 funerals. And in all that time, in all those wiretaps, in all those surveillance logs, do you know how many conversations we recorded with the people who actually produced the cocaine? The journalist guessed a number. The detective shook his head. None, he said. Not one. Not a single call. Those men were never on our tapes because they were never in our country, and they never needed to be. They sold to whoever answered the phone in Montreal, and every year, a different man answered the phone. Then he said the line that the journalist ended up building the whole piece around. We spent 8 years watching 2 groups of men kill each other over the right to be somebody else's employee. Hold on to that sentence. You're going to need it 10 times. Let us start where the concrete is coldest. Hochelaga, Maisonneuve, East End, Montreal. Late morning, August 1995. School holidays, warm enough that children were outside. To understand what happened on that street, you have to understand the shape of the Montreal underworld in the early 90s. And it was a shape almost nobody outside the city appreciated at the time. The cocaine did not belong to bikers. It never had. It came ashore through the port, and the port was managed quietly, professionally, almost bureaucratically, by an older network of importers with direct relationships to Colombian suppliers. They were not flashy. They did not ride in formation. They did not need to. They controlled the front door. The motorcycle clubs controlled the hallway. For years, that division of labor held. Product came in, wholesalers moved it, street crews sold it, and everyone tolerated a modest tax at each stage, because a modest tax is cheaper than a war. Then the tax stopped being modest. Distribution rights on the island became something worth killing over, and by the summer of 1994, two coalitions had formed, one led by the dominant club, one assembled from the independents and rivals who refused to pay, and Montreal began to burn. Understand the scale, because it is almost impossible to believe it happened in a wealthy G7 city. Car bombs, more than 80 of them, firebombings of bars, assassinations in restaurant parking lots at dinner hour, prison guards shot on their way to work as a message to the correctional system itself. Journalists attacked. Over roughly 8 years, the death toll would climb past 160 people, and among them were more than a dozen who had nothing to do with any of it. The morning in August 1995 is the one that broke the city's patience. A vehicle packed with explosives detonated on a residential street. The intended target was a rival dealer. The person who actually died was 11 years old, walking near his school, and his name became the name that Quebec still uses to mark the moment the public stopped shrugging. Here's the strategic error, and it is the same error you're going to watch repeat itself 9 more times. The club went to war believing that if it eliminated its rivals, it would inherit the market, but it was never fighting for the market. It was fighting for the right to distribute someone else's product, and the someone else, the importers with the Colombian relationships, watched the whole thing from a comfortable distance and simply kept selling to whoever survived. The war did not increase anyone's share of the pie. It increased the price of doing business, drew federal attention that had previously been merely irritating, and produced something no criminal organization on earth wants. Legislation written specifically about you. Canada passed anti-gang laws that reshaped how organized crime is prosecuted in that country. Then in the spring of 2001, a single coordinated operation swept up more than 100 members and associates in one morning, gutting the leadership structure across an entire province. Picture that morning if you can. 2,000 officers moving at once across dozens of addresses before sunrise in a coordinated sequence that had been rehearsed for months. Doors coming off hinges in suburbs where the neighbors had spent a decade pretending not to notice. Men who had believed themselves untouchable being walked out in their socks. And then, months later, the courtrooms so many defendants that the province had to build a purpose-designed facility to try them. A courthouse constructed specifically for the scale of the prosecution. That is not a metaphor. Quebec literally built a building because of that war. The leadership received life sentences. The mid-tier received decades. The organization in that province was functionally deleted and had to be rebuilt from scratch over the following 15 years. The supplier never lost a night's sleep. The distributor lost a generation. And here's the detail that should stay with you. Within 18 months of the crackdown, cocaine availability in Montreal had not meaningfully declined. Price barely moved. The product kept arriving, because the product had never depended on the men in the leather. It only ever depended on the ships. That is what it looks like when you go to war with the wrong end of the pipeline. Amsterdam, the Netherlands. Winter turning to spring, 2004. Rotterdam and Antwerp are between them, the reason Europe has a cocaine problem at the scale it does. Millions of containers a year, a handful of which are not carrying what the manifest says. Whoever controls a crack in that system controls a river of money, and by the early 2000s, the Dutch chapters of the world's most famous motorcycle club had become deeply, publicly, almost proudly enmeshed in the city's nightlife economy, which in Amsterdam has always been the polite word for the wholesale economy. The relationship with South American suppliers was by all accounts in the court record that followed. Business-like product arrived. Middlemen were paid, everyone behaved, then a shipment went missing. What happened next has been argued over in Dutch courtrooms for years, and I want to be careful here because the men accused of it were ultimately acquitted and the case remains contested. But the bare facts are not contested. In early 2004, 3 men connected to a South American supply network traveled to a clubhouse in Amsterdam to discuss the discrepancy. They were seen entering. They were not seen leaving. Some time later, their bodies were recovered, and a Dutch investigation that would drag on for the better part of a decade began trying to establish what happened in the hours between. Whatever the legal outcome, the underworld drew its own conclusion immediately, and the underworld's conclusion is the part that matters for our purposes. Because from the supplier's side of the ledger, the calculation is brutally simple. 3 of their people went to a meeting about missing product and did not come home. It does not matter whether the meeting went badly or whether they were killed somewhere else entirely. What matters is that a distribution partner in a European city had become a source of unpredictable risk. An unpredictable risk is the one thing a transnational supply organization cannot price. The Dutch chapters spent the following years under a level of scrutiny that made ordinary business almost impossible. Prosecutors attempted to have the entire organization banned as a criminal entity in the Netherlands, an effort that eventually succeeded in the courts, making the Dutch state one of the first in Europe to formally outlaw the club outright. Clubhouses were shuttered. Colors became illegal to wear. The suppliers, meanwhile, adapted in the way suppliers always adapt. They stopped routing through partners who attracted headlines and started routing through Balkan and Moroccan networks that did not wear identifying insignia, did not own buildings with the organization's name on the door, and did not park 40 motorcycles outside a meeting. The lesson is one that gets missed because it sounds too simple. When you are the visible partner in an invisible business, you are not the strong one. You are the liability. Vancouver, British Columbia. Mid-2000s. If you were designing the perfect North American import point on paper, you would design Vancouver. Deep water, Pacific-facing, enormous container volume, a metropolitan region of millions, and a land border to the south that leaks in both directions, cannabis going one way, cocaine and precursor chemicals coming the other. By the early 2000s, the local chapters were not merely present in that trade. They were, according to years of subsequent court testimony, embedded in the physical infrastructure of it: private security, transport, warehousing, the human machinery that makes a shipment move from a dock to a highway to a house without paperwork, which meant, inevitably, direct exposure to Mexican organizations moving methamphetamine and cocaine northward. And here the pattern repeats with almost mathematical precision. Somewhere in that relationship, the local operators began behaving less like contractors and more like principals. They set prices. They dictated terms. They imposed what one investigator later described as an access fee. A charge simply for the privilege of moving weight through territory, they claimed. This is the moment in every single one of these stories where the ground shifts, because a cartel does not experience a tax as a cost of business. A cartel experiences a tax as a claim of authority, and authority is the one commodity they will never share. What broke the arrangement in British Columbia, though, was not a war. It was something quieter and far more effective. A police operation running between 2004 and 2005 placed a paid agent inside the local chapter, a man who spent nearly 2 years wearing a recording device inside a full-patch environment where being searched was routine and being caught was fatal. When it ended, prosecutors had audio of internal meetings, drug transactions, weapons deals, and the internal governance of a chapter that had believed itself impenetrable. The suppliers noticed something the defendants did not. It was not the arrests that mattered. It was the discovery that this partner's internal security had been compromised for 2 years without anyone realizing it. From that point forward, The smart money in the Pacific Northwest stopped routing through patched clubs and started routing through diaspora networks, independent brokers, and crews with no fixed address and no clubhouse to raid. The bikers kept the reputation. They lost the volume. You do not need to be defeated to be replaced. You only need to become inconvenient. Before we go any further, I want to know where you are watching this from. Drop your country and your city in the comments, because these stories are not confined to one continent, and I guarantee at least one of the next 7 happened closer to you than you would like. If you're still here, hit the like button. And if you want the rest of these long-form breakdowns, subscribe. It genuinely is the only thing that keeps this channel making them. Now let us get back to the desert. Maricopa County, Arizona. Summer, the heat sitting at 42 degrees at 8 in the evening. Arizona is not a market. Arizona is a hallway. Everything that crosses the Sonoran border and intends to reach Chicago, Atlanta, or New York passes through a handful of interstate arteries, and whoever controls the rest stops along those arteries gets to touch an unfathomable amount of product without ever owning a gram of it. For decades, the desert chapters worked exactly that logic. They were not importers. They were the friction, the toll booths, the storage, the muscle, the local knowledge, the people who could tell you which trucking yard had a manager who did not ask questions. And for a long time, the arrangement was mutually profitable. Then methamphetamine changed the economics of everything. When Mexican organizations industrialized meth production, moving from small domestic labs to super labs, producing tonnage, the price collapsed and the volume exploded. Suddenly, the product moving through Arizona was not a luxury import. It was a commodity, and commodities are all about margin, and margin is exactly what a toll booth eats. So the toll booth got squeezed. What followed in the American Southwest across the 2000s was a slow, grinding, unglamorous displacement. The clubs did not lose a war. There was no dramatic showdown in a desert parking lot, whatever the movies have told you. What happened was that the people supplying the product simply began building their own distribution, recruiting directly, cutting out the intermediary layer, dealing with independent crews who charged nothing for territory because they did not claim any. Meanwhile, federal attention on the clubs reached an intensity that made them almost radioactive as business partners. Multi-year infiltration operations, indictments built on hundreds of hours of recordings, a federal effort to seize the organization's own trademark, and running underneath all of it, the endless internecine violence with rival clubs over turf that was, by then, generating a fraction of what it once had. The clubs were fighting each other for control of a hallway, while the people who owned the building quietly changed the locks. That is the Arizona story, and it is the least cinematic entry on this list, which is precisely why it is the most instructive. Most defeats in organized crime do not look like a shootout. They look like an invoice that stops arriving. Berlin, Germany, autumn, a Thursday, just after the shops close. Germany presented what looked on paper like an enormous opportunity. Wealthy population, Central European location, permissive nightlife economy, and a hashish and cocaine market fed by North African and South American routes running through Spain and the Netherlands. Throughout the 2000s, the German chapters expanded aggressively, absorbing rival clubs, taking over door security across entire nightlife districts, and building a presence in cities from Hamburg to Hanover to the Ruhr. The mistake was assuming that everyone they encountered was an organization. Because in several German cities, the dominant force in the street economy is not a club. It is a family. Extended clan structures, some tracing origins to Lebanon, some to Turkey, some to the Balkans, that operate on kinship rather than membership. There is no patch to earn. There is no probationary period. There is no chapter president who can be arrested and replaced. There are cousins and there are brothers-in-law, and there are 200 of them. And they have been in that neighborhood since before your club had a German chapter. When the door security business in certain districts became contested, the clubs discovered something genuinely alarming. You cannot decapitate a family. Arrest a leader, and there is no vacancy, because there was never a chair. Through the 2010s, the friction escalated into shootings, arson, courthouse brawls, and a proxy conflict involving a boxing club that German authorities eventually banned outright as a criminal organization. Bans came for the biker side too, city after city outlawing the wearing of insignia, chapters dissolved by ministerial order, clubhouses seized, and underneath all of it, the actual wholesale trade, the hashish coming up from Morocco through Spain, the cocaine coming out of Rotterdam, kept flowing through networks that had no logo to ban. There is a moment from that period that German reporters have described more than once, and it stays with me. A club delegation arrives at a meeting to settle a dispute over a nightlife district. They come in the way they always come in formation, in numbers, in colors, deliberately visible. Because visibility is the entire point of the uniform, the other side arrives in 3 ordinary cars. No insignia, no formation, nothing to... 4 men get out, and they are not the negotiating team. They are somebody's nephews, and the message that lands before a single word is spoken is that the other side does not need to demonstrate strength, because the other side is not an organization that can be counted. You cannot intimidate people who have no membership role for you to compare yourself against. That is the German lesson, and it is worth sitting with. A visible organization can be legislated against. A family cannot. The clubs built a brand. The people they were fighting built a bloodline. Only one of those can be outlawed. Sydney and the Gold Coast, Australia. June 2021, early morning. Before the traffic, Australia is the single most profitable retail drug market in the developed world. And the reason is geography. It is an island enormously far from every source country, with strong border enforcement and high disposable income. A kilo of cocaine that costs a few $1,000s in South America can be worth 10 or 15 times that landed in Sydney. Methamphetamine economics are, if anything, more extreme. For roughly 2 decades, Australian outlaw motorcycle clubs, including the local chapters of the world's most recognizable one, served as the retail and wholesale layer for products supplied by Mexican and South American organizations working through Asian and Middle Eastern brokers. It was for a while the most lucrative biker-adjacent economy on the planet, and then came the phone. In the late 2010s, a new encrypted communications device began circulating through the global underworld. It was expensive. It was invitation only. It could not make calls or browse the internet. It ran a hidden messaging application behind a calculator icon, and it was marketed quietly and effectively by trusted criminal figures who vouched for it to their own networks. It was operated by the FBI. The device had been built and distributed as a joint operation between American and Australian authorities, and for roughly 3 years, every message sent on it, every shipment manifest, every payment instruction, every photograph of a package, every argument, every threat, every order was read in real time by law enforcement. When it closed in June 2021, the results were staggering. Hundreds of arrests worldwide in a single coordinated sweep. Tonnes of narcotics, hundreds of weapons, hundreds of millions in currency and assets. And in Australia specifically, the operation cut directly through the outlaw motorcycle club structure, because the clubs had adopted the device enthusiastically and used it for exactly the conversations you would expect. Here's the part that connects it to everything else in this video. The suppliers survived it better than the distributors did, not because they were smarter, but because they were further from the transaction. The men arguing on those phones about who owed what, who was short, who was skimming, who was going to be dealt with, those were the men in the middle. The men at the source were mentioned in those messages far more often than they participated in them. Being the one who talks is being the one who gets recorded. That is not a criminal insight. That is just physics. There is a detail from that operation that I think about more than I should. The devices were not sold openly. They were vouched for. A trusted figure would hand one to another trusted figure and say, in effect, this is clean, this is safe, use this one. And that recommendation carried more weight than any advertisement ever could, because it came from inside the tent, which means the network's greatest strength, The fact that everyone in it trusted everyone else's judgment was the exact mechanism used to compromise all of it simultaneously. Australian police later described watching in real time conversations in which members of these organizations discussed serious plans against named individuals and then quietly intervening to prevent them. Dozens of times, threats to life were disrupted without anyone involved ever understanding how they had been intercepted. Imagine the paranoia in the weeks after it became public. Every message you had sent for 3 years, every photograph, every voice note, every argument you had assumed would die on the screen. The distribution layer in Australia has never fully recovered from that. And the thing that broke it was not a rival, not a cartel, not a rocket, not a war. It was a piece of consumer hardware and a very human desire to be told that something is safe. Southern Sweden and Denmark. Mid-1990s. This one is included because it demonstrates the pattern in its purest and strangest form. Between 1994 and 1997, Scandinavia experienced a conflict between two international motorcycle clubs that remains almost surreal to describe. It was, at its root, about control of the amphetamine and hashish trade flowing into the Nordic countries, product that originated with Balkan, Dutch, and North African networks and arrived through Northern European ports. Two clubs wanted to control the last leg. Neither controlled the first. What made the conflict extraordinary was the weaponry. Military depots were burgled. Anti-tank rockets, of the sort designed to destroy armored vehicles, were stolen and then used against clubhouses in residential areas of Scandinavian cities. A rocket was fired into a building in Denmark. Another struck a clubhouse in Sweden. There were car bombs, ambushes at airports, and shootings that killed and wounded people with no connection to either side. Roughly a dozen people died. The peace was eventually negotiated on TV, of all places, with representatives of both clubs shaking hands on a broadcast in 1997. And what did the winner win? Distribution rights in a small market for a product they still had to buy from someone else. The Balkan and Dutch wholesalers who supplied the amphetamine watched two organizations spend 3 years destroying each other, killing bystanders, and inviting the permanent attention of 4 separate national police forces over the right to be their customers. Every Nordic country subsequently overhauled its organized crime legislation. Clubhouse locations became subject to municipal restriction. Membership itself became a sentencing factor. The suppliers lost nothing. They simply took orders from whoever was still standing in 1998. If there is a single image that captures this entire video, it is that, 1, 2 men firing military ordnance at each other's houses over the right to resell a product neither of them makes. Malaga province, southern Spain. Summer, the season when the population of certain coastal towns triples overnight. The stretch of Spanish coastline running west from Malaga has been for 40 years the most important criminal crossroads in Western Europe, and it functions almost entirely on the logic of tourism. Enormous transient population, hundreds of thousands of foreign property owners, a cash-intensive nightlife economy, and critically, a 14-kilometer stretch of water separating it from Morocco. Hashish comes north across that water in volumes measured in hundreds of tons annually. Cocaine comes east from South America into Iberian ports. And on land, the brokers, launderers, and enforcers who service both trades sit in beachfront apartments in what Spanish police have long described as a permanent international convention of organized crime. Motorcycle club chapters establish themselves on that coast with obvious enthusiasm, moving into security work, nightlife, property, and eventually into the movement of product itself. The problem is that the Costa is not anyone's territory. It is a marketplace. Moroccan networks handle the water. Italian and Balkan groups handle logistics and money. British and Irish crews have decades of embedded presence. South American brokers manage supply. Nobody owns it because owning it is not the business. Access is the business. And access is granted by whoever controls the crossing. And the crossing is controlled by families in the Rift Mountains who have been doing it since long before anyone rode a motorcycle down that highway. Spanish operations across the 2010s dismantled chapter after chapter in Mallorca, in Malaga, in Barcelona, on charges ranging from trafficking to extortion to weapons offenses. Each time, the arrested were distributors and enforcers. Each time, the supply networks reorganized within weeks, because on the Costa del Sol, the club was never a player. It was a service provider that had confused its clients with its competitors. And there's something almost poignant about that stretch of coast if you stand on it and know what you're looking at. Retirees walking small dogs along the promenade, families eating late, music from the terraces, and scattered among all of it in the apartments with the good sea views, men from 11 different countries who have never met, all quietly servicing the same 14 kilometers of water, and none of whom would ever be foolish enough to plant a flag on it. The ones who planted flags are the ones whose names ended up in the indictments. Sao Paulo, Brazil. Any evening, 22 million people and a skyline that never fully goes dark. There is an organization in Brazil that operates on a scale that makes almost every group discussed in this video look like a neighborhood association. It emerged from the prison system in the early 90s, and it now functions as something close to a parallel state across large portions of the country, with a written statute, a disciplinary code, an internal court system, membership dues, and a decision-making structure that reaches from inside maximum security facilities out into thousands of communities. It does not have a clubhouse. It has jurisdictions. International motorcycle clubs have chapters in Brazil. They have had them for years, and this is where the story becomes interesting, because what happened there is not a war. It is the opposite of a war. It is an accommodation so total that it barely gets discussed. You cannot patch over in Sao Paulo the way you patch over in Hamburg. There is no vacuum to fill. Every meaningful street-level distribution point in the metropolitan region already answers to a structure that can coordinate simultaneous actions across dozens of prisons and hundreds of neighborhoods, and has demonstrated that capability publicly on multiple occasions, in ways that shut down an entire megacity. So the clubs that exist in Brazil exist at the sufferance of something larger. Some chapters are genuine motorcycle clubs and nothing more. Others sit adjacent to the trade in the way that any social organization in that environment inevitably does. But nobody with any sense attempts to impose a tax on product moving through a favela. Because a tax implies the right to refuse service, and the right to refuse service implies authority. And in that city, the authority question was settled decades ago by people who are still, in many cases, running things from inside a cell. The most important entry on this list is the one where the confrontation never happened, because somebody somewhere did the arithmetic correctly for once, which brings us to the last one. And the last one is not a fight at all. Culiacan, Sinaloa, Mexico, any hour. The Melicon, the truck traffic, the mountains sitting behind the city like a wall. Here's a question that almost nobody asks, and the answer to it explains this entire video. Why is there effectively no significant outlaw motorcycle club presence in the Mexican interior? Think about how strange that is. This is an organization that has planted chapters in more than 60 countries. It operates in Russia, in South Africa, in Turkey, in Thailand, in the Balkans, in places with active insurgencies and functioning mafias and hostile police forces. It has expanded into virtually every environment on Earth where there are motorcycles and money. And yet the heartland of the world's most powerful narcotics production, the place where the actual product comes from, has remained essentially untouched by that expansion for the entire modern history of both organizations. That is not an oversight. That is a survival calculation. Because in that environment, a motorcycle club offers absolutely nothing that anybody needs. It cannot supply because the supply originates there. It cannot import because the import is outbound. It cannot provide protection because the organizations already field armed units with military-grade equipment and better intelligence networks than most municipal governments. It cannot provide distribution because distribution is family-run and has been for 3 generations. What it can provide is a rival flag flying in someone else's country. And that is the one thing that is guaranteed to get answered. There have been individual members, individual arrangements, individual Mexican-American associates who bridged both worlds and paid for it in the way such men usually pay. American federal indictments across the last 20 years are full of cases where club members moved cartel-supplied methamphetamine and cocaine through the United States, as customers, as couriers, as distributors, as the last mile. Never as partners, never as equals, and never ever on the wrong side of the border. There is a story told in law enforcement circles, and I want to flag clearly that it is a story, not a documented event, the kind of thing that circulates because it is useful rather than because it is verified. But it is worth repeating for what it captures. A group of American club members, so the story goes, once traveled south to renegotiate a price. They had done their homework. They had leverage, or believed they did. They controlled certain routes north. They had volume. They were prepared to walk away. They made their case. It was heard politely, and then the man across the table asked them a single question. He asked them how many people they had. They gave a number, a big one, by their standards, chapters across multiple states, thousands of members and associates worldwide. The man is said to have nodded, thought about it for a moment, and then told them how many people he had in one municipality. Not one country, not one state, one municipality. Then he said the thing that ended the negotiation. He told them he was not refusing their offer. He was explaining that they had misunderstood what kind of meeting this was. They had come to renegotiate a price. He had agreed to see them as a courtesy to a customer. Whether that conversation ever happened, I could not tell you, but every documented case in this video points to the same underlying reality, and the reality is that the story does not need to be true to be accurate. Because the fundamental truth of the entire relationship is this: the club needs the cartel far more than the cartel has ever needed the club. Supply can always find a new distributor. A distributor without supply is just a man in a vest with a lot of overhead and a very expensive social calendar. So the map has a hole in it. 60 countries and one enormous absence right in the middle of the thing that makes the money. That absence is not weakness on the club's part. Frankly, it is the single smartest decision the organization has ever made. They understood the boundary. In Montreal, in Amsterdam, in Vancouver, in Arizona, in Berlin, in Sydney, in Stockholm, on the Costa del Sol over and over. Individual chapters forgot it, or convinced themselves the boundary did not apply to them, or simply got greedy in a year when greed was affordable. And every single time, the correction arrived. Sometimes it arrived as a car bomb on a residential street. Sometimes as a 2-year undercover operation. Sometimes as a phone that everybody trusted and nobody should have. Sometimes it arrived as nothing at all. No violence, no drama. Just a supplier quietly deciding to route the next shipment through somebody less famous. And a chapter slowly discovering that the money it had counted on for a decade had simply stopped showing up. That last one is the most common ending, and it never makes the news. So here is what all 10 of these stories actually add up to, and it has nothing to do with motorcycles. Every criminal economy on Earth has a hierarchy, and the hierarchy is not determined by who is toughest. It is determined by who is closest to the origin of value. The men who grow it, cook it, and ship it will always outrank the men who resell it, no matter how frightening the resellers are, no matter how many countries they operate in, no matter how much iconography they have accumulated. Reputation is not leverage. Leverage is leverage, and leverage in that world means one thing only: can the other side get what they need without you? For 30 years, in 10 different countries, the answer kept coming back the same. Yes, easily, and usually cheaper. The organizations that survive longest in that world are not the ones that win the most fights. They are the ones that understand precisely and unsentimentally what they actually control and what they are only borrowing. The ones that lose everything are the ones who mistook a rented corner for an owned kingdom and went to war to defend a claim they never held the deed to. The port in Montreal still runs. The containers still come off the ships at 4 in the morning in February with the wind coming off the river. The product still moves, different names, different vests, different nationalities, same hallway. And somewhere south of all of it, in a place where the mountains sit behind the city like a wall, the people who actually own the business have never once had to fire an anti-tank rocket at anybody's clubhouse to prove a point. They just wait. They know the corner will be available again soon. It always is. Because in the end, empires built on territory can be taken. Empires built on reputation can be outlawed, and empires built on violence eventually run out of people willing to be violent for the price. But an empire built on being the only place the product comes from, that one never has to fight at all. That is why there is a hole in the map. That is why the hole has been there for 60 years. And that is why, out of every organization on this list, the only ones who genuinely understood the rules were the ones who quietly agreed never to test them. 10 confrontations, 10 different decades, 10 different flags, 10 different police forces, 10 different endings, and one single mistake made over and over by men who were far too proud to notice they were making it. If this one held you to the end, do me a favor and let me know in the comments which of the 10 surprised you most, because I have a strong suspicion it was not the one you expected walking in. Subscribe if you want the next one, and I will see you there.